Hello everybody, my name is Zen and welcome back to more of our player guide series where in previous episodes we've talked about things that you need to know before you really even get playing, right? So that's the business model, that's character creation, how to make like a really nice character that you'll enjoy, and then the different classes that are available to you in the game. But now we're going to talk about something that you should do, one of the first things you should actually do when you get into the game, which is open up that options menu and start getting all the options sorted out, because there's a lot of stuff that's turned on by default or turned off by default that you need to rearrange and get things really sorted out. That way you're set on the right path for playing the game and you're not set up with really bad habits that the game actually teaches you to begin with. So in order to get into the options menu, the first thing you do is you just hit escape while in the game. You go to preferences, and I know the interface editor button is there. I'm going to point it out to you guys. If you really want to mess with your interface, you can. I wouldn't suggest it just yet. We'll do a video specifically on interface stuff and how to get it working to its full potential. But I did just want to point out that it is there since it does pop up. However, go to your preferences and that's how you will get started with messing with all of the options in the game. So once you're in there, you'll see a few things on the left-hand side that you can scroll through, and there's a lot of options here. So we're going to start on controls, because that's really the first one that we have to deal with. And there may be some things turned off or on by default, so just go through the list here and just kind of listen to and see and compare it with what I'm doing on my options menu. But the first thing that you want on is auto loot on right click. Makes leveling a lot quicker. And then the second thing you want is area loot. And what that does is when you loot one guy and there's a ton of people to loot, it'll loot everything all at once. And Star Wars was one of the first games to actually do this, and all these other MMOs started following this because it saves you a lot of time, and it's quite nice. It's a really slick system. Then there's one thing you have to turn on. Deselect target upon clicking on terrain. What this does is when you have a target selected, if you just left click anywhere on the screen, basically on the terrain, it'll deselect them. That's important for advanced gameplay that we'll talk about later on, but that's one of those things that you want to have turned on. That way you can start kind of getting used to it, especially if you're a new player. Turn that on right away. If you're an advanced player and you don't have that turned on, you probably should, because it makes a big difference later on. Then you'll want to turn off the auto target closest enemy. What that does is while you're fighting, if you use an ability and you don't have anything targeted, it'll target the closest one, and that's really frustrating. I've raided with people doing ops groups and even just normal group play that have that turned on, and they'll constantly break things that we have crowd controlled, that we've stunned and set out of the way so we don't have to deal with them right away, or they'll pull bosses on accident. It's just one of those things you have to turn off. Do not use it. It causes really bad gameplay. Then you want to enable focus target. The way you do a focus target is you just click on anything that is a target, enemy, or friendly, and you just hit Alt F. That will pop up a focus target on your screen. It's very useful for later play that we'll talk about as we go into the more advanced gameplay. As for the other options here, though, you'll want to enable use quick slots on key press. That means as soon as you press your key down, it'll use whatever ability. Makes it a little bit quicker. Camera max distance you can change. I would suggest dragging that all the way up to the maximum it can go. That means when you scroll your camera out, you could be super far away. That's important for group play and PvP and anything later on in the game. Not so much when you're just leveling, but I would suggest always be zoomed out because you could see a lot more of the playing field. Although there is certain situations where that has an impact on frame rate, but usually not. You'll want to turn on camera pivot. That's pretty self-explanatory. And smart camera is kind of a preference thing. Basically, if you have smart camera on, you start moving, it'll set your camera behind your character rather than keeping it at an angle or whatever angle you had it before. It'll keep you zoomed out, but it'll just make it easier on your camera movement. Then the last thing in this options is you want to have show next target in cycle. and I'll explain what that is, and cycle in screen space. So what this does is when you hit tab, it'll automatically select an enemy, the closest enemy to you. And with the show next target in cycle, it'll put a little arrow above their head. It'll be an empty arrow, and that shows you that that's the next one that you will target if you hit tab. And tab is just a really nice key to be able to use to scroll through targets real quick. Now, what it means by cycle in screen space is it won't target anything that isn't currently on your screen. So if something's behind you, it's not going to start targeting that. That is important to have on, especially in group play. So you'll tap through targets. You can see, what target you have targeted based on the full arrow, and then there'll be a hollow one, which is the next one. So the next major thing to look at in the preferences is combat logging. This is kind of more an advanced thing, but we'll say if you really want to, then enable combat logging. What this does is it makes it so there's a file written to your computer every time you go into combat that basically logs whatever you did. This is really nice for third-party applications that allow you to track your damage per second, or heals, or damage you're taking, stuff like that. Important for advanced play, not so much for beginner play. So if you're a beginner, leave it off. Remember that it's there. You'll need it later on. But keep defeat messages in chat on. So what that does is when you get hit and killed by something, it'll tell you what killed you and how much it hit you for. That's important for kind of learning fights if you go into flashpoints, or heck, even just the stuff that you do while you're in your story phases. It'll help you, I guess, get better at the game by making you realize what actually killed you. As far as user interface is concerned, on the left hand side, you have some things here that you can turn on and off based on your preference, but personally I have mine set up the way I do, so if you just want to copy mine, that's completely fine with me. The reason I disable cover bar, and will highly suggest you disable cover bar, we'll explain what that is in a second, is because it makes you a worse player when you get into key bindings. So cover bar is something that pops up while you're playing an agent, if you go, or I guess an agent or a smuggler if you're playing sniper, and or the gunslinger primarily. When you go into cover, it basically brings up a secondary bar that covers your main bar, and you can bind keys to it. That sounds nice and dandy, but the second you get out of that, all of that bar is different. A lot of people get really used to the cover bar. Personally, when you're using a lot of key bindings, like you will be later on, especially after watching our guides, it doesn't work. It doesn't work the way you would want it to. It gets really messy, and in fact, it makes it so you're not memorizing the keys you're supposed to be pressing when you're supposed to be pressing them. So it kills your muscle memory, makes you a worse player overall. As far as the other things go, you've got conversation alignment gain. I would highly suggest turning that on. Basically, in the middle of the wheel when you're in a conversation, if there's a dark side, light side choice, it'll tell you which one will give you that dark side or light side points. And then there's detailed item tooltips. Highly suggest turning this on. When you scroll over an item, the tooltip will show you a lot more. Comparative tooltips shows you what an item is compared to what you have on. That's very important. Same with companion comparative tooltips. Turn that on. That's very good. Stat summarization in item tooltips. That is a mouthful, but turn that on. It's worth it. There's a preference thing here, though, with use operation frames as group frames. You just try it both. The normal group frames basically has like a list of guys on the left hand side of your screen, and it's got their portrait and everything. But once you go into the operation group frames, it basically turns it into just a health bar, a stack of health bars. So you kind of figure out what you like more, what you don't like more. Like I said, it's a preference thing for your normal group frames. However, the next part is really important. So this is basically a cooldown thing that happens on your bars. So as you use abilities, all of this is what this is pertaining to. So you want to enable show ready flash, show global cooldown ready flash, show cooldown text, and you can kind of experiment with the different texts that there are. If you hover over them, it tells you which one does what. Personally, my style that I use is 2 and 4. Those are the two ones that I use. That's obviously reading from left to right. And the text size, when you're choosing what it is, that's a pretty optional setting. That's something that you'll just have to decide what you want it as, and tenths of a second is another optional setting. But let me show you what I mean by that. So as you see in combat, when I'm using abilities, it's giving a cooldown color over things that are on cooldown. and that means things I can't use right away, and it's giving me a timer to when they're ready. It's very important for long cooldowns, knowing when they're going to be ready, and short ones, because it allows you to just do combat a lot better. It makes you more aware of what is on cooldown, what is off of cooldown. If you see, my bars are set up very specifically because of the way that I play. A lot of the time I'm not focused on my bar, I'm looking at the middle of my screen because I have a lot of muscle memory of where the buttons are, so I know what to hit when I want to. And with the current setup I have as the style 2 and 4, it allows me to better see what is on cooldown and what isn't, and it just works better for me. But that's a personal thing. I would suggest just going through those different styles and figuring out what you like better. Think in your head though what will make you realize what is on cooldown and what is off of cooldown easier in your head, because it'll probably change per person. So for the graphics tab though, it is completely preferential, and it'll be different for everybody because everybody's computer is different, right? So I have all of my stuff turned up to high because my computer can handle that and recording at the same time, but yours may not be able to. So you're going to have to just kind of experiment what will give you the best FPS, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the first thing that you need to turn off is vertical sync. What this does in a nutshell, without explaining it too far, is it sets your frame rate as a max of what your refresh rate of your monitor is. Usually your refresh rate is about 60 to 70 for a typical monitor. What this means is your frame rate cannot exceed beyond that. So if you can run on high and run at 100 frames per second, which is what my game usually runs at, then if I have vertical sync on, it will just cap it out at 60 and the game will look not so good to me, right? So I like my game running at 100 frames per second. It's smooth, it looks better, so that's why I turned VSync off. I would suggest you do the same thing, because if you can get up that high, it makes the game look a lot better and run better. But here's the important bit. If you are in game and you do Shift Control F, in the bottom left corner it'll pop up with a frame counter, so it'll tell you what frame rate you're running. I would suggest going into your ship and doing this, and then experimenting with the graphics options, seeing what gives you the best graphics or what gives you the best frame rate per graphics setting. So try to get the max graphics you can with the best frame rate you can and kind of balance that out. Once again, that'll change based on your computer though. And there is one last thing in the preferences that you need to change around, and that is in the nameplates. So a lot of people don't realize this, but some of this stuff is turned off by default, which is kind of unfortunate because it makes you a better player if you have it on. So I would suggest turning your nameplate on for your companion. Allows you to see where they're at all times when you're doing solo play. It's just really nice, right? I would suggest turning on enemy NPC nameplates. That is a huge important one. And enemy players, that is also an important one. Basically, if there's an enemy in the area, it'll pop up their nameplate as red, so you know that they're an enemy, you know where they're at. It's easy to see. It's easy to see how much life they have. If you're in a group of enemies, it's easy to see what all of their life is at. So if you're doing AoEs, you know how effective it's being. Then with enemy players, you won't get ganked so easily in PvP because you'll be able to see where they're at. As far as friendly players, I would suggest turning it on because then you can see where your friends are at. And that goes hand in hand with the show class symbol. That's a preference thing. I like having it on because I like knowing where different classes are in my raid. So say I'm leading my raid, which is what I do, and I'm in an operation and I see a guy off in the corner and I see his nameplate. It's a friendly player, but I can't quite see who he is because it's, you know, at a weird angle. There's a lot of spell effects going on. If you have that class symbol above, I could see, oh, he's a power tech, or oh, he's a assassin. I know exactly who it is because, you know, we only have one of those in our group. So that's a preference thing. It also helps in PvP. But always show health bar is a very important thing, once again, so you can kind of see who is damaged and who isn't. I don't like having my own health bar on because I have my interface showing me that information. I also have scale nameplates with distance. That's more of a depth perception thing. I like that on. Some people don't. Show guild names. You don't have to have that on. I have it on because I like to know, you know, who is in what guild. It's just one of those things that I bump into players and like to know that kind of thing. Show resolve bar, that is a PvP thing. You can have that on, but if you don't really PvP, just turn that sucker off because it just adds more to your interface. And friendly NPCs, I would only turn on in certain situations, have it off normally. If you're really looking for an NPC and you just can't find them and you know that they're around the area you're at and it's a friendly NPC, turn that on, you'll be able to see them from a mile away. It's a nice green glowing dame. As a rule of thumb, green is friendly, yellow is neutral but won't attack you if you go close, and red is as aggressive and will attack you if they go close, and that's just the name's colors. And the last one is blue, and that means it's a friendly player or companion. Overall, though, that pretty much covers all of the options in the game that you should have turned on and off. If you have any questions on why you have certain things turned on and off, please ask them in the comments below, and I'm sure some of our awesome community members will help answer those if I do not get to them right away. But on that note, we shall see you guys next time.